Dream of the Red Chamber, Chapter 89.
Think about a time, and we have absolutely all experienced this,
Oh, definitely.
when you overhear just a fragment of a conversation, like just a tiny isolated snippet that's completely stripped of its original context.
Right, like catching half a sentence in passing.
Exactly. Maybe you're, walking past a closed-door meeting at work, or you're standing in line at a coffee shop. Or maybe you just catch a few whispered words from your partner in the other room.
And your brain just instantly latches onto it.
It really does. And
Yeah.
somehow your brain takes that tiny, ambiguous fragment, throws all rational logic out the nearest window, and just spins it into this massive, life-altering, catastrophic narrative.
Because, that's what brains do. They hate a vacuum.
Yes. You go from hearing a half sentence like, "I just don't know how to tell them," to suddenly believing you're getting fired.
Or your relationship is completely over.
Right. Or your entire social circle is secretly turned against you.
The human brain is just incredibly skilled at filling in the blanks. And the fascinating, kind of terrible part is that it almost always fills those blanks with our absolute worst fears.
It's a really profound, albeit exhausting, survival mechanism. We are biologically hardwired to scan our environments for threats.
Always looking for the danger.
Exactly. And when information is hidden from us, or, when we are denied the ability to engage in direct, transparent communication, a whisper behind a closed door doesn't just sound like a whisper. It feels like a roar.
Wow, yeah. It feels huge.
In the absence of clarity, paranoia just quickly becomes our baseline reality. Because ultimately, our brains would rather invent a terrifying certainty than sit comfortably in the unknown.
That is so true. And that devastating psychological spiral, that journey from a tiny lack of communication to a total unraveling of reality, is exactly what we are going to explore today.
That's such a rich topic. Dream of the Red Chamber.
Such an incredible text.
Now, for anyone listening who might not be familiar, this isn't just a book. It is arguably the pinnacle of Chinese fiction, like this massive, sprawling family saga.
But at its core, it's a devastatingly precise psychological text.
It is. The anatomy of a rumor. We're going to look at the psychology of hidden grief, the tragedy of overthinking, and how, a simple failure to communicate can literally, physically become a matter of life and death.
What is so remarkable about this specific chapter is how startlingly modern the psychology feels.
Right. It doesn't feel ancient at all.
Not at all. We are looking at a text deeply embedded in the incredibly rigid, highly formalized social structures of an ancient aristocratic household during the Qing dynasty.
Where the rules are just absolute.
Exactly. The rules of behavior are strict and unyielding. Yet the internal emotional landscapes of these characters, the crippling anxiety, the depressive spirals, the physical somatic responses to trauma, they are intensely relatable to a modern reader.
It really is a masterclass in psychological tension.
It is. It shows us that while social rules change over centuries, human wiring really doesn't.
So to really understand what happens in this chapter, we first have to set the stage. We need to understand the environment our characters are operating in, because the backdrop to this entire emotional unraveling is actually a massive bureaucratic crisis.
The context is everything here.
Right. So the patriarch of the family, Zhang, is completely distracted. The text tells us that there has been a catastrophic natural disaster, a massive flood in the Henan region.
And this isn't just a minor flood?
No, rivers have literally burst their banks, entirely submerging prefectures and counties. This isn't just heavy rain. This is a total infrastructure collapse that requires immediate, intense government intervention.
That is vital context to remember. Zhang is not just a father. He is a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Works.
So it's literally his job to fix this.
Exactly. When a flood of this magnitude hits, the state machinery goes into overdrive. State funds have to be allocated, grain needs to be moved, city walls and dikes need immediate repairing.
The logistics must be a nightmare.
They are. The text notes that from the moment the news breaks until the deep winter, Zhang is just consumed by this. He is busy every single day, constantly at his government office.
So he's never home.
Right. And he is the strict enforcing authority figure of the domestic household. He's the pillar around which all the rules are built. And suddenly, his attention is entirely pulled outward, ripped away from the domestic sphere.
Let's frame this with a mental model for you listening, because we've all felt a version of this dynamic. Think of a household, or even a workplace, like a pressurized cabin.
I like that analogy.
Right. The strict authority figure, in this case, Zhang, is the pressure system holding everything rigid, like the boss being in the office. Everyone knows how to behave because the pressure forces them into shape.
And when he leaves to handle this flood, the cabin depressurizes.
Exactly. For a young, sensitive protagonist like Daiyu, who really relies on that external pressure to dictate his day and keep him focused on his studies, the sudden lack of gravity just leaves him floating. He is totally unmoored.
And that depressurization is incredibly dangerous for someone like Daiyu. The text explicitly points out that without his father's constant surveillance, Daiyu's studies, quote, gradually slackened.
So he's slacking off.
Big time. He is still physically going to the family school, but mostly just to keep up appearances so the tutors don't report him. Mentally, he is completely checked out.
Just going through the motions.
Yeah, and this lack of structure leaves him incredibly vulnerable. When you don't have external demands forcing your attention outward, your attention naturally turns inward.
That makes sense.
Without the rigid demands of his father's expectations to distract him, Daiyu is left alone with his own intrusive thoughts, his own memories, and most importantly, his own unresolved grief.
Which brings us to a morning that starts out completely mundane, but then turns into an absolute psychological landmine. Daiyu is at this school, pretending to study, and the weather undergoes a violent shift.
It's very dramatic.
Yeah, we're in mid-October, and the text describes this so vividly. There is the sudden sound of wind violently rattling the paper windows at the school.
And when they look outside, there are heavy, oppressive layers of black clouds rolling in from the northwest toward the southeast.
It's a sudden, biting, bone-chilling freeze.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere.
And the author uses this environmental shift to mirror the internal shift that is about to occur. It's not just a gentle change in the season, right?
No, it's aggressive.
It's an aggressive, sudden drop in temperature. That sudden, biting cold acts as a physical manifestation of the emotional shock Daiyu is about to experience. The atmosphere itself is warning the reader that something is about to break.
So because of this sudden cold snap, Daiyu's maids, back at his private courtyard, realize he's probably freezing at the school. So they pack up some winter clothes and send a servant, a boy named Beaming, to rush them over.
And they don't just send any random winter coat.
No, they send a very specific garment. It is called the peacock feather cape. And when Beaming arrives at the school and pulls this cape out of its wrapping, Daiyu's entire world just stops.
The reaction is visceral. The text describes his physical response with such piercing specificity.
What exactly does it say?
It says that the moment Daiyu saw the garment, he became dazed or foolish. The original phrasing implies a total blankness, like a literal loss of the soul's presence in the body.
So he just completely shuts down.
He does. He doesn't just look at the coat. His higher cognitive functions seem to shut down. He is utterly paralyzed by it.
For you listening, you might be wondering why on earth a warm winter coat would cause a total psychological shutdown.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a piece of clothing meant to keep him comfortable. Why the extreme reaction?
To understand this, we have to look at the neurobiology and psychology of objects. It is not just a coat.
Right.
This specific peacock feather cape carries an immense, suffocating emotional weight. It is an object irrevocably tied to a profound recent trauma.
What happened?
Well, a little while before this chapter, this exact cape was accidentally burned, leaving a hole in it. And it was painstakingly, meticulously mended by his absolute favorite, most beloved maid, Kingwin.
Oh. Yeah.
And Kingwin did this while she was deathly ill, pushing herself to the absolute brink of exhaustion to fix it for him. Shortly after that, she died.
Oh, wow. So she practically gave her life to fix this coat.
Exactly. So when Daiyu sees this cape, he isn't seeing a piece of clothing. His brain is bypassing the rational prefrontal cortex entirely.
It's going straight to the emotion.
Yes. The visual stimulus of that cape hits the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, and triggers a flood of visceral memory. The cape acts as a physical anchor to a time when Kingwin was still alive, and simultaneously, a brutal reminder that she is gone.
Because grief is rarely linear.
It almost never is. You don't just process a loss and move cleanly to the next stage. Grief lies dormant, waiting to be activated by a sensory trigger.
Like a specific smell, or hearing a certain song on the radio.
Exactly. Or in this case, the sight of the golden peacock threads woven together by someone who is now dead.
I see the psychological weight of it, absolutely. But I want to push back here for a second and look at this from an outsider's perspective, like maybe the perspective of the other students or the servant in the room.
Okay, let's hear it.
Doesn't Daiyu's reaction seem a little indulgent? Look at what actually happens. The servant brings him a coat so he doesn't freeze. Daiyu completely freezes up emotionally, refuses to put the coat on at first, and only relents because the servant practically begs him.
Right, the servant is terrified.
Yeah, the servant is like, if you catch a cold, the masters will punish me. Please just wear it so I don't get beaten. So Daiyu puts it on. But then he just sits there at his desk, completely blank, staring at his books without reading a single word.
He's totally checked out.
And then he decides he's done for the day. He fakes an illness, tells his elderly teacher he feels a sudden sickness coming on, and goes home early. He skips school, goes back to his lavish courtyard, refuses to eat his dinner, and makes his entire staff of maids tiptoe around his dark mood. All because he looked at a coat.
It's a lot of drama.
It feels like the ultimate luxury of a spoiled aristocrat,
It looks entirely indulgent from the outside, absolutely. And that is a really fascinating critique because it highlights the complex power dynamics at play in this text. You are right, Daiyu is incredibly privileged.
He has a whole team of people managing his life.
He is surrounded by a small army of servants whose entire existence revolves around anticipating his physical needs, like ensuring he doesn't feel a chill. He has the social luxury of faking an illness and skipping his responsibilities to go home and lie in bed.
And the teacher just lets him.
The elderly teacher lets him go without a fight because he knows Daiyu is the grandmother's favorite, the golden child of the family. The teacher simply doesn't want the political headache of disciplining him. So, yes, the privilege is undeniable and glaring.
Exactly. He has a total, impenetrable safety net. Most people in the world can't just clock out of their lives because they feel sad.
They cannot. But what this scene brilliantly demonstrates is that absolute material privilege does not equate to emotional invulnerability.
Money can't buy happiness or insulate you from grief.
Exactly. Daiyu is economically protected from the harsh realities of the world. He is socially elevated above almost everyone around him, yet he's emotionally paralyzed. His extreme reaction shows that all his family's wealth, all his elite status, cannot shield him from the profound, devastating, universal human experience of grief.
That's a great point.
In fact, his privilege almost makes his grief more complicated and isolating. He is surrounded by dozens of people whose job is to care for him, yet he is completely isolated in his pain.
Because they're his staff, not his peers.
Right. No one in that room can actually comfort him, because to them, he is the master and he is acting strangely. He's trapped in a gilded cage of his own sorrow.
That isolation becomes incredibly sharp when he actually gets back to his courtyard. As we mentioned, he skips dinner. His head maid, Shirin, tries to coax him to eat, warning him that if he starves himself, his immune system will drop, he'll get sick, and again, the servants will bear the blame.
And I just ignores her.
He completely ignores her, and then he decides he needs to actively mourn. But this brings up a huge conflict. He cannot just mourn openly, can he? His grief has to be heavily managed.
It does, and this introduces us to the secret architecture of mourning within this society. We have to remember the strict hierarchy.
Right, class divide.
Daiyu is the master, a member of the ruling elite. King Wen was a servant, essentially property. Furthermore, her death was highly complicated and politically charged within the household.
Oh, really? What happened?
She didn't just die peacefully. She was dismissed from the mansion under a cloud of intense suspicion and moral judgment by Daiyu's own mother.
Oh, wow. So she was disgraced.
Exactly. Therefore, for Daiyu, the heir to the family, to openly mourn a disgraced servant would be socially unacceptable. It would be seen as an act of blatant rebellion against his mother's authority.
And a violation of the class boundaries.
Yes, the very boundaries that hold their world together. He is strictly forbidden from publicly acknowledging his loss.
So he has to engineer his own private clandestine ritual. And the specific granular details of what he does the next morning are just fascinating. He wakes up and tells his mates he wants to be left completely alone.
He needs that isolation.
Yeah, and he requests to be moved to a very specific location, Kingwen's old room, which has been empty since she was kicked out.
Yeah.
He explicitly notes that because it has been empty, it is very clean. But he uses the term ki, which means clear and cold.
He wants that coldness.
Right. He doesn't want a heavy, comforting meal. He specifically asks his maids to just leave some fresh fruit in the room so he can, quote, borrow a little of the fruit's fragrance.
Notice what he's doing here with his physical environment. He is exercising intense sensory control, essentially engaging in deliberate sensory deprivation.
Stripping away all the comforts.
Yes. He is consciously removing himself from the physical warmth, the constant chatter of the servants, and the rich, heavy food of his daily aristocratic life. He is stepping into what we call a liminal space.
A liminal space, like a threshold.
Exactly. A waiting room between one state of being and another where the normal rules of his busy life are temporarily suspended. He is physically constructing an environment that perfectly mirrors his internal sense of emptiness and coldness.
It is exactly like he is building a psychological sensory deprivation tank, just so he can finally feel his feelings without performing for anyone.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
For you listening, think about how this translates to modern life. Have you ever had to hide your true emotional state all day at work? Maybe you're going through a terrible breakup or a family emergency, but you have to sit in meetings plastering on a fake professional smile,
Just white-knuckling it through the day.
answering emails, pretending everything is fine, and you are just waiting, counting down the minutes until you can get to your car, close the door, and finally let your guard down and break down in the parking lot. Or locking yourself in the bathroom just to have a quiet moment to cry.
That is exactly what Daiyu is doing.
In a sprawling mansion teeming with hundreds of people and constant watchful eyes, he literally has to barricade himself in an empty, freezing room just to have permission to grieve.
And within that barricaded freezing room, he performs a highly specific, ritualized act of creation and destruction. The text details that he takes out a very specific type of stationery.
Oh, the paper. Yes, let's talk about the paper.
It's a piece of pink paper with gold-flecked flowers on the corners. He lights a stick of incense, and he sits down to write an elegy, a poem mourning her death.
Because nothing in this book is an accident. Why pink paper with gold flecks for a poem about death? Wouldn't you use stark white or, like, plain paper?
In classical Chinese culture, white is indeed the color of formal mourning. But remember, Daiyu is not engaging in a formal, socially sanctioned mourning ritual.
Right, because he's not allowed to.
Exactly. He is engaged in a highly intimate, deeply personal expression of love and loss for a young woman. The pink paper with gold flecks is delicate, feminine, and beautiful. It represents Qingwen's youth, her beauty, and the intimate nature of their bond.
So it's a tribute to who she was.
Yes. By using this beautiful, lively paper to write a poem about death, the contrast makes the reality of her absence even more jarring and heartbreaking. He is using the materials of life to process the finality of death.
The text of the elegy he writes on this paper is incredibly revealing. We actually get to read what he writes. He talks about how she was his constant companion, how their minds were intimately bound together.
It's very moving.
And then he uses this specific phrase: "Who could foresee wind and waves rising on flat ground, causing her life to instantly cease?" Let's break that down.
Yeah.
What does wind and waves on flat ground mean psychologically?
Wind and waves on flat ground is a powerful classical idiom that perfectly encapsulates the specific trauma of sudden, unexpected loss. Think of the imagery. You are standing on flat, solid, dry ground.
You feel totally safe.
You feel completely safe. There is no ocean in sight. And then suddenly, a massive, violent wave crashes over you out of nowhere.
Wow, that's terrifying.
It speaks to the sheer unpredictability of tragedy. There was no long illness to prepare him, no warning signs he was allowed to see. The ground was flat, the world was stable, and then out of nowhere, destruction hit, and she was gone.
He's just grappling with how fast it all happened.
He is grappling with the fundamental unfairness and the shocking speed of mortality. He follows this line by comparing her passing to water flowing east, a common poetic metaphor for time and life moving in one direction, irrevocably, never to return to its source.
He writes this beautiful pouring out of his soul, and then once the elegy is finished, he burns it, right there in the room, holding it over the burning incense.
He doesn't save it to read later.
No, he doesn't save it in a book. He watches it turn to ash. Then he sits quietly, waiting for the stick of incense to burn all the way down. Once the physical ritual is over, he emerges from the room, puts his public mask right back on, and tells his maids with a perfectly constructed fake smile that he's just feeling a bit stuffy and needed some quiet time to read.
The burning of the text is the ultimate expression of private grief. We see this concept in modern grief therapy, the idea of writing a letter to someone you have lost or someone who has hurt you and then destroying it.
So the act of writing is the point, not the keeping of it.
Exactly. The poem was not meant to be read by the living. It was a direct spiritual communication with the dead. By burning it, he achieves two things simultaneously. First, he spiritually transmits the message to Qingwen in the afterlife.
And second,
He destroys the physical evidence of his socially unacceptable mourning. It is a profoundly tragic moment that highlights the massive, agonizing divide between his inner, authentic self and the outward, rigid performance his society demands of him.
Daiyu's private ritual gives him a temporary release. He gets the emotion out on paper and burns it. But it doesn't solve his profound sense of isolation. When he steps out of that room, he is still fundamentally alone in a house full of people.
He needs actual human connection.
Right. To actually cure that loneliness, he is forced to seek out the one single person in the entire world who might actually understand the depth of his feelings. His cousin, Daiyu.
His intellectual and emotional soulmate.
Yeah. You would think, okay, this is the turning point. He is going to the person he loves most to find some comfort. But because he's coming from a place of such fragile, heavily guarded grief, his attempt to connect is doomed from the start. Instead of finding solace, the interaction they have it's just painfully, excruciatingly awkward.
It is an agonizing scene to analyze because the tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Yet the conflict is almost entirely unspoken.
It's all subtext.
Entirely subtext. When Baiyu arrives at Daiyu's residence, which is called Jiaxiang Manor, the author gives us a masterclass in atmospheric storytelling. The visual cues in the room set the emotional tone before anyone even opens their mouth.
Let's paint that picture because the setting does half the work here. Baiyu walks in, and Daiyu is sitting inside, copying Buddhist scriptures.
Which is very significant.
Right. For a young woman of her background, this immediately signals a deliberate withdrawal from the secular world. It's a focus on the spiritual, the eternal, or perhaps a meditation on suffering, rather than engaging with the present reality of the household.
She's pulling away.
And then, Baiyu notices a new painting hanging on her wall. It is called Fighting the Cold, and it features the moon goddess, Changji, standing with her attendants in the freezing, frosty atmosphere of the moon.
The choice of this specific painting is deeply symbolic. Baiyu asks her about it, trying to make small talk, and Daiyu quotes a line of poetry in response. The frost goddess and the moon maiden both endure the cold. In the frost of the moon, they compete in beauty.
So what is she really saying there?
If we look at the mythology of Chenji, she is a figure of ultimate isolation. She took the elixir of immortality and floated away to the moon, where she lives forever, but she lives entirely alone in a freezing, desolate landscape.
So she's relating to that isolation.
Yes. By hanging this painting and quoting this poem, Daiyu is subconsciously, or perhaps consciously, aligning herself with these cold, isolated, untouchable figures of myth. She is projecting an aura of enduring, freezing conditions.
And that's literal and emotional.
Exactly. This is literal as the physical winter is approaching. But more importantly, it is emotional. She feels increasingly isolated, unsupported, and emotionally frozen within the household. She is telegraphing her emotional state through her interior decorating.
Baiyu is trying to find a way in. He is looking for a conversational hook to bridge the gap between them. And his eyes land on her guqin, her traditional stringed instrument, hanging on the wall. The text stops the narrative momentum here to give us hyper-specific, almost obsessive details about this instrument.
The details are incredible.
Baiyu looks at it and asks, "Is this your guqin? Why is it so short?"
A guqin is a highly revered ancient Chinese zither associated with scholars, philosophers, and deep emotional expression. It is usually a very standardized size.
So the fact that it's short is weird.
Very weird. Daiyu's response to his question reveals so much about her lifelong sense of not quite fitting into the standard molds of the world. She explains that it is not a standard size because she had it custom made when she was a very small child in her home province.
This was before she was orphaned and sent to live with his family, right?
Yes, she was learning to play, but her arms literally couldn't reach across a normal-sized instrument, so it was built specifically for her frail body.
That's so sad, really. It highlights how fragile she's always been.
It does. She goes on to detail the exquisite craftsmanship. She mentions the crane mountain and phoenix tail designs carved into the wood, which are symbols of longevity, high status, and artistic refinement. Crucially, she points out the ox hair crack patterns in the lacquer.
Okay, what do ox hair cracks mean? To a modern ear, a cracked instrument sounds broken or poorly maintained.
In the world of antique Chinese instruments, it is exactly the opposite. Lacquer naturally cracks as it ages over decades or centuries. Ox hair refers to incredibly fine, dense, hair-like cracks that only appear on very old, extremely high-quality instruments.
Well, so it's a good thing.
It's a great thing. These micro-fissures actually improve the acoustics. They allow the wood to resonate more freely, producing a clearer, deeper, more melancholic tone.
So she is telling him that this instrument is incredibly precious, deeply personal, and uniquely attuned to her. It is a beautiful object, but is also a physical symbol of her unique, isolated existence.
Right, it fits her perfectly.
It was made specifically for her, to fit her fragile, solitary frame, and it produces a sound unlike any other. She is essentially presenting him with a metaphor for her own soul. And this is exactly where Daiyu, in his clumsy attempt to connect, steps on a landmine.
He tries so hard, but he gets it so wrong.
He really does. He is trying to show her that he pays attention to her, that he cares. So he says, the other night I was walking by your courtyard, and I secretly stood outside your window and overheard you playing the guqin and chanting your poetry.
Eavesdropping, basically.
Yeah, which is already risky. And then, instead of just complimenting her, he decides to offer a technical critique of her poetic structure.
Such a bad move.
He says, I was wondering, the first part of your song used a level rhyme, but right at the end, it suddenly shifted to an oblique rhyme. What was the meaning of that?
To understand why this is such a disaster, we have to understand the technical rules he is referencing. In classical Chinese poetry, words are categorized by their tonal qualities.
Okay, like level versus oblique.
Right. Level tones are flat, smooth, sustained tones. Oblique tones are sharp, rising, falling, or abrupt tones. A poem using level rhymes feels smooth, stable, and emotionally balanced.
And shifting to oblique changes that.
Drastically. Shifting suddenly to an oblique rhyme at the end of a stanza is jarring. It breaks the established harmony and signals a sudden spike of distress, chaos, or unresolved tension.
So what he's actually asking is pretty intrusive.
By pointing this out, Daiyu is essentially saying, I analyzed your private song, and I noticed that it started out calm but ended in emotional chaos. What are you hiding? Why are you upset?
Oof. It's a seemingly innocent academic question. But to Daiyu, who is fiercely guarding her vulnerabilities, it is a massive intrusion.
She feels totally exposed.
She didn't invite him to hear the song, he eavesdropped. And now he is psychoanalyzing her based on a technicality.
Her response is immediate, defensive, and completely shuts him down. She says, this is the natural sound of the human heart. It goes where it goes. There are no set rules.
Which is a great defense.
And then she delivers a line that lands like a heavy iron door slamming shut between them. She looks at him and asks, how many true confidants have there been since ancient times?
Whoa.
That is a devastating rebuke. She's basically saying, true understanding between two souls is incredibly rare in the history of the world, and clearly, you are not one of those souls. You don't understand me at all.
I want to pause the narrative here.
Yeah.
Because this dynamic, this painfully stilted, uncomfortable conversation where everything goes wrong despite good intentions, is so universally relatable.
We've all been there.
For you listening, think of this as the intimacy paradox. The higher the stakes of the relationship, the lower our tolerance for miscommunication, which ironically causes us to stop communicating naturally altogether.
It's so true.
Have you ever been in a text message thread with someone you deeply love? Maybe a new partner you are terrified of losing, or a best friend you're currently in a weird fight with. You are both overanalyzing every single word.
Typing and retyping.
Yes. You type something out, delete it, rewrite it, try to add an emoji to soften it, delete the emoji because it looks desperate, and you spend 10 minutes trying to find the perfect, flawless phrasing.
And it never works.
Because you are trying so incredibly hard not to say the wrong thing, you end up sending a message that sounds completely unnatural, cold, and robotic. The other person reads that coldness, assumes you are pulling away, gets defensive, and fires back an equally guarded, robotic response.
It's a vicious cycle.
You love each other, but your intense fear of messing up the connection leads to total communication paralysis.
That is a perfect modern parallel for exactly what is happening in this room. The text provides a specific psychological concept for this phenomenon, sarav tu, which translates to true intimacy turning into distancing.
Intimacy turning to distance.
Yes. It is deeply tied to what modern psychology would call anxious attachment dynamics. They know each other so intimately and they care about each other so deeply that they are terrified of the stakes.
So they're both just frozen.
Daiyu knows Daiyu is physically frail and highly emotionally sensitive. He is walking on eggshells, terrified of saying the wrong thing, upsetting her, and making her physically ill. He is overthinking his approach, which makes him sound analytical and detached when he critiques her poetry.
And how does Daiyu read that?
Daiyu is hypervigilant. She reads his hesitation, his careful, stumbling words, and his weird academic critique as him blowing hot and cold. She thinks he is hiding something, or worse, that he is pulling away from her.
Their intense, overwhelming care for one another is exactly the mechanism that prevents them from communicating honestly. Because they are so afraid of breaking the glass between them, they refuse to touch it at all.
Which is so tragic.
So Daiyu just sits there. The text explicitly says he feels like he has 1,000 things to say to her, 1,000 emotions bubbling up, but he cannot find a single appropriate word.
He's stuck.
He feels he has already spoken out of turn. He is afraid of chilling her heart any further, so he just awkwardly stands up. He makes a weak excuse to leave, saying he has to go visit another cousin across the compound.
And the tragedy deepens the moment he walks out the door. Daiyu, sitting alone in her room after he leaves, immediately regrets her defensiveness.
Oh, she knows she messed up.
She reflects on the conversation and realizes she was too harsh. She thinks to herself that her words came out much too coldly and she wishes she could take them back.
But it's too late.
The moment has passed. The damage of the silence, the damage of the things left unsaid is already done. And this silence, this massive vacuum of direct communication between the two people who need it most, creates the perfect, fertile breeding ground for an absolute disaster.
Because nature, and especially human psychology, abhors a vacuum. If you do not communicate directly with someone, your brain will find something else to fill that void. And in this specific case, the void is instantly filled by rumors.
Which leads us to the absolute climax of this chapter.
As soon as Daiyu leaves, Daiyu is left sitting alone in a room, feeling thoroughly unsettled by his strange, hesitant behavior. Her anxiety is already spiked.
She's on edge.
She is primed to look for reasons why he was acting so weirdly. And then she overhears something outside, the danger of the overheard fragment.
It's the catalyst for everything that follows.
Daiyu is inside, and she overhears her two personal maids, Suyen and Zihuan, whispering outside on the terrace. Now, the architecture of these traditional courtyard houses is really important here. The windows are made of lattice wood, covered in thin paper.
They offer almost no soundproofing.
None at all. They let in light, but they also let in every single sound. You can hear someone breathing heavily on the other side of a paper window. Eavesdropping is practically built into the architecture.
And what her maid Suyen shares is a piece of third-hand gossip that hits Daiyu like a physical blow to the chest.
What does she hear?
Suyen is whispering to Zihuan, and she says she just heard a massive secret from another maid, Shishu. The rumor is that Daiyu is officially engaged to be married.
To someone else?
To someone else. Now, if it were just a vague rumor, Daiyu might have brushed it off, but the details Suyen shares are terribly specific, which makes them sound utterly convincing.
The details make it real.
Yeah, exactly. Suyen says the bride is from a prefect's family, a high-ranking, wealthy, politically connected family. She says the girl is known to be both beautiful and highly educated.
And she even names the matchmaker. Right.
She does. She says the arrangement was facilitated by a relative from the East Mansion, a Mr. Wang. This specific detail gives the rumor a terrifying bureaucratic legitimacy.
That sounds so official.
And crucially, Suyen whispers that the grandmother and the family elders have strictly ordered everyone to keep it a secret from Daiyu so that he won't get distracted from his studies or throw a tantrum.
The cinematic quality of how the author stages this scene is just brilliant, almost bordering on gothic horror. You have the two maids outside in the cold courtyard, terrified of being caught, whispering this massive, life-altering secret.
And Daiyu is just trapped inside.
Daiyu is inside, frozen, absorbing every word, realizing her entire future has just been obliterated. And then suddenly, breaking the tense silence, a pet parrot hanging in a cage in the courtyard squawks out, mimicking a human voice. "The girl is back, poor T."
It is the perfect, terrifying jump scare.
It really is.
The parrot's sudden, loud shriek completely shatters the secretive tension. It terrifies the maids, who realize how loud the courtyard actually is, and they quickly scatter.
But symbolically, it's so dark.
Symbolically, it serves as a jarring, almost mocking punctuation mark to the devastating secret Daiyu has just absorbed. The parrot is mindlessly mimicking the sounds of polite, everyday domesticity. "Poor T, welcome back." While internally, Daiyu's entire world is violently collapsing.
It highlights the absurdity of the polite surface world just continuing on normally, while true human tragedy happens in utter silence.
It's a brilliant juxtaposition.
So what does this rumor actually mean for Daiyu? Here's the question I think almost anyone listening in a modern context would scream at the book. Why doesn't she just ask someone?
It's the most common modern reaction.
Right. Why doesn't she march up to the grandmother who loves her, or go to Daiyu's mother, or even march straight to Daiyu himself, grab him by the collar, and demand to know if this engagement rumor is true? Why does she just absorb this third-hand gossip from a maid and retreat into her room?
To understand her reaction, we absolutely must understand the societal trap that Daiyu exists within. We often say that information is power. In Daiyu's world, she has absolutely no power.
meaning she has no right to information.
Exactly. She has zero right to information regarding her own life. She is an orphaned girl. Both her parents are dead. She is living entirely on the charity of her mother's wealthy relatives.
She has no safety net.
None. She has no father or brother to advocate for her political or financial interests. In this deeply patriarchal, hierarchical society, marriages are not born of love. They are strategic alliances arranged by the elders to consolidate wealth and political power.
So the people actually getting married have no say.
The actual individuals getting married are considered the last to know, and they have absolutely no say in the matter.
So for her to walk up and ask about it directly,
It would be catastrophic for her reputation. It would be seen as highly inappropriate, aggressive, shameless, and practically a violation of the fundamental social norms that govern her existence.
just for asking a question.
Yes. A respectable, unmarried, aristocratic young woman is strictly forbidden from concerning herself with, let alone inquiring about, her own marriage arrangements. To ask about the marriage arrangements of a male cousin would be even worse.
Oh, because it would out her feelings for him.
Exactly. If she were to ask, she would expose her own presumptuous romantic hopes regarding Daiyu. She would subject herself to extreme humiliation, and she would likely be heavily disciplined for her lack of modesty. She is entirely, completely at the mercy of the adults behind closed doors' decisions.
She is trapped in a system where the trajectory of her entire life is decided. In rooms she isn't allowed to enter, by people she isn't allowed to question. She is expected to just politely, silently accept whatever fate is handed to her.
And this total lack of agency is exactly what makes the rumor instantly, horrifyingly credible to her.
Because it sounds exactly like what they would do.
Yes, it makes perfect logical sense that the family elders would arrange a wealthy, politically advantageous match for their golden boy Daiyu and keep it a secret to avoid drama.
And it makes perfect tragic sense to her that she, the orphaned, physically fragile, financially dependent cousin with no political connections, would be discarded.
The rumor perfectly aligns with her objective social reality, and it preys directly on her deepest, darkest insecurities.
And believing that she has completely lost her future, believing that the one single person in the world she truly loved and relied on is going to be married off to a stranger, Daiyu makes a chilling, silent, and absolute decision.
This is where we see her take control in the only way she can.
This is where we move from the psychological trap to the physical consequences. We move into what we can call somatic self-destruction. The text gives us access to her internal monologue as she stumbles back to her bed and lies down.
Her internal state is just devastating.
She describes her emotional state with a terrifyingly precise metaphor. She feels like she has been thrown into the ocean. Think about that physical sensation for a second. The sheer weightless panic of drowning.
It's an overwhelming feeling of helplessness.
The feeling of being entirely consumed, dragged down by something vastly larger, colder, and more powerful than yourself, with nothing to grab onto. She reflects on the bitterness of her life, the fundamental vulnerability of having no parents to protect her.
And then, looking at this impossible situation, she decides how to take control of the one single thing she still has authority over, her own end.
It is a devastating, incredibly dark pivot. She decides that she will not live to see the humiliation of Daiyu marrying someone else. She will not be the pathetic, discarded cousin watching the wedding festivities.
The text uses a terrifyingly specific phrase to describe her resolution.
What's the phrase?
Art, which translates roughly to intentionally ruining, wasting, or trampling upon one's own body. She makes a conscious, ironclad resolution to slowly, methodically destroy her own health.
So it's deliberate.
Entirely deliberate. Her goal is that within a year or even half a year, she can die what she considers a clean death before the wedding can ever take place.
It is a silent protest. It is a slow, agonizing, self-inflicted erasure. We need to detail exactly how she goes about this, because it is an incredibly disciplined, almost clinical act of self-harm. How does she execute this decision?
She begins by systematically weaponizing her own environment and her own biology against herself. As the freezing winter approaches, she stops covering herself with blankets at night.
Exposing herself to the cold on purpose.
Yes, deliberately exposing her fragile, already compromised respiratory system to the freezing cold. When her maids try to add layers of clothing to her during the day, she refuses them.
And then it escalates, right?
More drastically, she engages in a practice the text refers to as tle, which means cutting off grain. This means a total, absolute refusal of food. She stops eating entirely.
Just completely starving herself.
And when the doctors are called and they prescribe her bitter herbal medicines to stimulate her appetite and warm her blood, she secretly spits them out or refuses to drink them.
The physiological toll of this must be rapid and brutal.
It is. Within just half a month of this regimen, her body begins to shut down. Her digestive system weakens to the point where she physically cannot even stomach a single sip of thin rice porridge.
She becomes completely bedridden.
Bedridden, coughing constantly, reducing herself to nothing more than a dying breath.
And the psychological state she enters during this physical starvation is where the text becomes truly terrifying. As her body breaks down, her mind begins to warp.
This is a crucial psychological observation from the text.
The expert analysis of the text highlights a brilliant classical metaphor used to describe her state of mind. A mind full of suspicion becomes the shadow of a snake. I want to unpack this because it is crucial. What does the shadow of a snake mean in this context?
It is a reference to a very famous classical Chinese idiom, seeing the reflection of a bow in a cup and mistaking it for a snake.
How does that story go?
The original story is about a man who goes to a banquet, drinks a cup of wine, and thinks he sees a small snake swimming in his cup. He goes home, becomes violently physically ill from the thought that he swallowed a snake, and nearly dies.
Just from the thought of it.
Yes. Later, he finds out it was just the reflection of a curved bow hanging on the wall above the table. Once he realizes it was an illusion, he is instantly cured.
That's a powerful story.
The idiom describes a state of extreme paranoia where false alarms completely dictate a person's physical reality. When you are operating from a foundation of absolute suspicion, fear, and starvation, your brain loses its ability to rationally filter information.
It twists everything.
It will contort every innocent piece of data, every random shadow to confirm your worst fears.
It is confirmation bias on a lethal biological scale.
Exactly. Her brain is starved of nutrients and flooded with cortisol. Daiyu starts seeing confirmation of Baoyu's impending marriage everywhere she looks.
Even in everyday interactions.
Yes. The text notes that when anyone in the household whispers in the hallway, she instantly assumes they are gossiping about the wedding preparations.
And she gets suspicious of her own family, too.
When her aunt, Shu Auntie, comes to visit her to check on her health, Daiyu immediately becomes wildly suspicious. She doesn't see a caring aunt. She thinks the aunt is there on a reconnaissance mission, checking to see how close Daiyu is to dying so they can clear the way for Baoyu's new bride.
Oh, that is so heartbreaking.
It escalates to the point of auditory hallucinations. In her feverish, starving sleep, she hears the servants calling out for the second Madame Bao, which would be the official title of Baoyu's future wife.
So she's literally hearing things that aren't there.
Her mind is literally manufacturing the very torment that is killing her body.
I really want to emphasize the sheer, agonizing tragedy of this for a moment. Daiyu is literally starving herself to death over a piece of third-hand gossip. A rumor spread by a maid who heard it from another maid.
And the devastating irony is that the listener knows the rumor isn't even true.
Exactly. There is no engagement.
Yeah.
But because the social rules forbid her from verifying it, and because she feels she has absolutely no inherent worth in this society other than her potential connection to Baoyu, she internalizes the rumor as an absolute fatal truth.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the mind-body connection.
Her psychological despair creates a literal, fatal physical deterioration. Her mind is acting as the executioner of her body.
It highlights a terrible, dark paradox regarding the concept of control. We talk about control in a void in modern psychology.
What does that mean exactly?
When human beings are stripped of all external agency, when Daiyu has no control over her social standing, no control over her financial wealth, and absolutely no control over whom she marries or whom Baoyu marries, they will instinctively search for something to control.
They just need to grasp onto anything.
Right. The only territory Daiyu has absolute, unquestioned sovereignty over is her own physical body. By choosing to systematically destroy it, she is in a very dark, deeply tragic way reclaiming her agency.
If she is not allowed to choose how she lives, she will orchestrate exactly how and why she dies.
That is exactly right.